Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Cordles, parent of three in three different life stages. One is launched, one is in college, and one is in high school. And today we are continuing our season 4, and we're talking about prevention. Prevention?
Yeah, prevent. That part of parenting.
Yeah, tell us about this thing.
Yes. So we are going to be continuing this conversation. But as a reminder about our content we're covering in season 4, we're talking about this parenting approach called the RPM3 from the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development. Came out with this kind of model and publication. And it's an acronym. So respond. And then today, prevent.
There we
Then
go.
we'll continue with monitor, mentor, model. So all things that we do in our parenting, just thinking about this approach and these different parts of it, how we can understand it across our different ages. But one reminder we want to give is that this is about a lifelong parenting perspective, right? It's across all ages. It's across multiple days and weeks. Thank goodness that one day is not the only day, because I tell you, there's days I don't want to be the only day that would matter. So that lifelong perspective of parenting. So when we talk about prevent and these other aspects, we think about it across our entire lifetime with our kids. So
we do. And I'm wondering if our listeners have figured out how you threw a framework in as a whole season. We know Mackenzie loves a framework, right? So not only, has she tossed frameworks and steps into each of our episodes, this is now an entire season as a primary. Okay, so let's start with research and the definition of prevent. So what are we preventing in the first place? Well, what we're doing as parents over our child's entire lifetime, essentially, is that we are wanting and desiring to prevent risky behavior or problems, essentially, before they arise. And this is essentially a definition that has two little parts. And so one thing that we try to prevent is we try to spot possible problems ahead of time. And then what we try to do is the second part, which is to work through the problem. And so as we think about spotting a possible problem or risky behavior, we then want to think ahead and say, okay, well, how then can I work through that problem or risky behavior?
Yes. And I feel like that kind of ties, in the first episode of the season, we talked about those 4 words to describe and reflect on our parenting of consistent, effective, active, attentive. With preventing, I really think it does require us to be that kind of attentive parent, in tune with what's going on with our kids so that we can spot those possible problems. And then, that knowing what to do about it, right? How do we actually prevent that risky behavior? What do we do about the problem? Kind of comes in with that effective, right? That what we try does help prevent that risky behavior.
Exactly.
So I feel like that those words of effective and attentive are really important here with our parenting.
They are. And one thing we were trying to do as we were researching was, okay, what other words might we use to think about the word prevent? And one of those words was observe. Another word was anticipate. You just said the words in tune. And those are all part of this process. So what I'm wondering is, can you think of a time that you might have been effective and attentive, so to speak, in spotting a potential problem and then you worked through it?
I'm sure I have. That's a thing we do, right? That's a thing we do as parents. Okay, well, I can think of a kind of obvious one. So my kids are little, and when we moved to our new home, we there's this there's these stairs and kind of in a high traffic area in our home. And acknowledging that my child who was just getting ready to walk and who was just learning to climb stairs in
Mm.
our previous home, that was going to be a problem. And so that was actually on my list of like move-in day, move-in week priorities. I was like, you know what? We got to get a baby gate here, something that we can latch and close,
Mhm.
because even if they would be playing through the hallway and fall, it couldn't be, it needed to be something firm and sturdy because it was kind of a high traffic spot. So, I mean, I guess in that way, I kind of like, I spotted a fall risk and solved the problem with the baby gate. Does
Mhm.
that count?
It counts. It all counts.
Yeah. What about you? What's something recently where you've been preventing?
So, about 10 years ago, probably now, I moved my family out of school that they were attending, out of town, literally out of state, actually.
Mhm.
And about that time, my children would have been, middle school and elementary and early elementary. And so, especially that middle schooler, people said to me, "Oh, this is really going to be difficult." And so I was getting all of these conversations about how to spot and prevent, problems or issues around her being moved from her friend group in one state into another friend group in another state. And so there
Yeah.
was that spotting of potential problems and then working through it. One of the things that we did was we actually visited each of the schools that the three children were going to attend. And a super cool thing that was happening was the new school was actually going to have a field trip in our town
Ooh.
that my middle schoolers, future classmates, would be attending, and they were going on this field trip. And so what we were able to do was my daughter was able to attend the field trip with her future classmates in her own town. So it was a really excellent opportunity to she was in her arena, she was in her hometown, and her future classmates were coming into her space where she felt comfortable, and she was able to show them around the museum that they were at. And so I would say that's one way that I address this idea of prevent in this parenting approach.
Yes. Okay, and your example even reminds me of some of the other kind of more common. I was like, what do we do? We prevent. What do we
Yeah, we
what do we
prevent.
do? One of our other things, I think even like screen time.
Mm,
And so spotting my daughter is kind of getting to the age where she gets to have some screen time a little more,
mhm,
and not like only right in our lap kind of time. And so it's like, okay, so we need to learn spotting the potential of like, okay, you could go to something else I don't want you in, or,
right.
and so spotting that potential problem, and then yeah, that our solution has been like, okay, setting clear guidance around this is what you can do right now on
Mhm,
this screen. And the expectation of like when we talk about this, if you'd like to change to something else, you need to ask us. And
yes.
so kind of setting that guidance has been an important part. And then sometimes using tools like, like apps that are timers or, parental guidance, stuff like that. And so that's something we do to prevent, kind of a problem or risky behavior there with screens. So,
We do. We do,
yeah.
definitely. Okay, so here's a little bit more research.
Mhm.
This is talking about how we provide expectations, how we provide boundaries and communications before the problem occurs. So again, it's that word anticipatory, or we anticipate those problems before they occur. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has specific topics actually that provide this kind of ahead of time information to parents. And so instead of reading all of the items, we're going to just kind of lump them into some categories. How about that?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, and Lori actually taught me this term like in preparation for this for this episode. I was like, okay, we're talking about prevention. What is the like there's I didn't quite have the words, and she's like, anticipatory guidance, right? And I'm like,
Mhm.
yes, that is what we talk about.
See,
Where we can
only,
guide
13 letter word I know, right? Is it 13 letters?
I know it's a term.
It
It's a
sounds
technical
cool.
term. But that we are guiding our kids by anticipating what's coming up. So yeah, some of the ways we do that. One that the American Academy of Pediatrics, kind of a category of the things they have, talks about physical safety. So think about like driving a car, riding a bike, crossing the street, car seats and seat belts, poisoning prevention, gun safety, strangers, all that kind of stuff that keeps our kids physically safe. We can help prevent those kinds of risks. What are some other
Exactly.
ones?
And along with physical safety, we also think about physical health. So, things about our physical health include movement or injury or sleep or illness, those nutrition and wellness types of things. And as we talked about this word prevent in the model, this whole idea of physical safety and physical health were immediately where my brain went to. And so, starting on some other categories that took us a little bit to think about.
Yes. A big part of it is understanding development is kind of another, language development, physical development, social
Mhm.
emotional development, and how that relates to the kind of guidance and non-physical discipline we give to our kids to keep them healthy, safe, appropriate behaviors, right?
Yes.
So that was another category where we kind of prevent problems and behavior is with our guidance because we understand what our kids, what we can expect of them.
Mhm. Another word we looked up was the word observe, and the word observe showed up in this category from the American Academy of Pediatrics when it comes to family stress
Mhm.
and significant problems like violence or family instability, and observing for those types of problems and anticipating ahead of time how we might see family stresses and significant problems be impacting our children.
Absolutely, which reminds me so much of there's a lot of research around this idea of resilience, right?
Mhm.
So how do we have resilient kids that can handle family stress and that are stronger and all of these things, which is very closely tied to the next category related to substance abuse. So, witnessing it, preventing our kids from getting involved in it, those kinds of things also relate to preventing.
They do. And you shared a little bit about the last one, which is looking ahead and anticipating how TV and media might be impacting our children, and how do their ideas and thoughts about risky behaviors become formed through television media. And, as we think again, you mentioned apps and ways that we can, anticipate how to help our children navigate those waters of media. And when we're not around, we need to think ahead about how can they make good decisions when we're not there.
Yes. I even recently have started talking to my preschooler about ads.
Mm,
Like that ads are actually trying to get you to do something, right?
mhm.
And that's a concept that's just like of like they want you to want this toy or to they want you to do that thing. Like it's not totally benign. They
Exactly.
have an objective. But that kind of stuff of having those conversations and across lots of different ages with our kids
Oh,
related to media and TV and social media and apps and all of it. Yeah.
absolutely. I am totally a product of Saturday morning breakfast ad material, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. So fortunately, right, we talk about all of these and it's like, man, and you list them all out. Like, can I anticipate all that?
Yeah.
I was
Ah,
like, and we have great news, right? One, so many of these things we already have the skills and already are navigating. And there's a lot of things in our close, society world that help us along the way. So like some resources that help us
yes.
prevent these things. Or if you have questions about certain concerns with these, that they're great resources you can tap into. So yeah, we have kind of a little list. I mean, informal, right? Just things
Yeah.
our team thought of together. But
Go ahead,
I
share them. Share those.
yeah, I would say we talked about like the American Academy of Pediatrics is a
Mhm.
great resource for trustworthy information related to physical health and safety and locally, like your family physician, your
Mhm.
doctor, whoever you could see regularly, those well child visits, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. What else did we say? I gotta find my list here.
We've got, the community health partners. We talked about local friends and family who are experts in those different areas. You have a lot of experience in terms of people who are working with entities who are involved in prevention in general, whether it's physical prevention of injuries, like you said, the poison control, or to prevention of family stressors, whether they're counselors or therapists.
Yes, yep. A few more that we had were public health officials are great help. They do tons of prevention work. Some community action agencies, sometimes your nonprofits do that kind of work. There's a website called Common Sense Media that who just puts out unbiased information about media that's out there so parents can learn about what their kids have access to. And then another really great one we had was school counselors
Yes.
are a great help with great expertise on kids and risky behavior and challenges. So tons
I
of great
have
resources.
one more. I have one
Oh,
more.
please.
And that is your local extension.
Oh, how did we not?
I know.
Your local Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Office, or if you're out of state, the state that you're in,
Mhm.
you have access to extension, and our role is just to share research-based information with you. And
Exactly.
so you can always trust your extension office.
You can. That's their job, research and information, right? So, okay, let's
Yes,
talk about research again. We played
yes.
this little game at when we were talking about temperament in season 3. And so, what we did was we kind of separated out the topic we had by age. And so, we're going to do that again when we talk specifically about this word prevent. So, how do we anticipate and provide anticipatory guidance throughout the ages? I'm going to let you start with infants and toddlers.
Yeah, so I mean, I gave the example earlier, which I feel like it is where my mind went when the word prevent comes up. I think of like baby gates, child proofing, anchoring bookshelves, child locks on the cleaning cupboards. Like that's the kind of stuff that comes to mind right away. And it's important, right? That is an important way to keep our kids safe. So that's kind of the obvious one, but yeah, even things like helping our kids learn appropriate rules. Our infants and toddlers are brand new to the world. They're testing out all these skills they have and they don't know what's safe and not safe. And so we have to teach them about what's appropriate behavior and what's allowed and why certain things aren't allowed. And so our rules and our expectations for our kid is another really important way that we help prevent those problems.
We do. And as
What
you
about our
think
kids a little older?
yeah, as you think about the kiddos that are a little older, like preschool or school agers, where, their development at that time is all about mastering the tasks at hand. So, how can they master riding a bike? And as you think about preventing problems or issues with that, what are things that we think about? Well, okay, we need a helmet. We need to talk about road, the rules of the road in terms of crossing streets. We think about our elementary school kids who are trying to maybe master different types of skills, whether they're educational skills, and we talk about listening to teachers and how do you show respect to adults in school environments. And as we look at those things that they're doing, we also have to think about, what are, again, our rules and expectations around appropriate guidance and discipline. And because they're going to be on their own, that means that they have to understand their own rules and limits.
Yes.
Because they're in these public settings with other people, we're not there to always remind them of rules and limits. So they have to know what they are.
Totally. Yeah, they're going to start using those rules and limits on their own without an adult there to remind them every time. Yeah, definitely need those rules and limits and need to have them memorized to
Yes.
have them on their own. And so that as we think about those kids that even, right, our preteens and teenagers that are even a little older, things like teaching our kids to say no to peer pressure,
Mm.
talking about ways to get out of an unsafe situation or a situation where they feel uncomfortable, that kind of helps prevent them from being involved in some of those risky or problem behaviors. And then, even things as simple as teaching them safe driving, right? How do we that we wear our seatbelts and how can we be safe when we have friends with us in the car who might distract us and all those things. So again, across all the ages, we see this part of parenting where we're preventing we're spotting that behavior because we're preventing the problems from arising. Hopefully, catching
Yeah.
them beforehand, anticipating them.
Yes. And I
So,
remember a conversation that we had with our writer, Barb Dunn Swanson, and she talked about think about all the experience and knowledge that you have as the adult and how we just listed off everything by age, but we made this assumption that, okay, well, they know, the kids know, they know, right? And she's like, but ladies, they don't know. Remember that we need to share the reason why behind some of these anticipatory and preventing types of guidances because our kids need to know that why. And when they know the why, they might be more apt to listen to it, right?
absolutely. Well, and like I said, the word preventing does make me think of like physical safety, like injuries and stuff like that. And so to me, it's easier. This preventing part is easier with our like little kids, right? Like infant, toddler, in preschool, because you can kind of get by with the because I said so.
Yes.
But you're so in charge of what happens in their day when they're that young that it is kind of easy to just because I said so.
Mhm.
But yeah, then what happens when they become school age kids riding their bike by themselves to school, or preteens making decisions with their friends without an adult with them, or teenagers driving by themselves? If they don't know why those rules are in place, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And as you think about that why, also that why gives them words for when their friends say,
Mm.
why? Why do we have to do this? And that your child can't just say, well, because mom said so, right? Or because I
Not
said
cool
so.
enough.
They need that why essentially as their own tool in their own toolbox to prevent some of that peer pressure or buying into that peer pressure because I have a tool that is strong enough to help me not do that. I know the why behind it.
Yes. I even think of when my friends would get in my car, in high school, I was always like, seatbelt. You'll have to
Yes.
wear a seatbelt. Like, I mean, even to the point that sometimes they're like, "Ugh, we're in the back. My parents don't. You're in my car. You have to wear
Yeah.
your seatbelt." But because I believed the reason, right? I
Mhm.
believed like, okay, I'm a young driver. I could, I could get in an accident. Like
Mhm.
I could hurt my friend in the back seat if I get in an accident. But like that reason why was why I had a strong belief about it.
Exactly.
Yes. That
Exactly.
reason's important. So we've got some great tips that some of from this publication we're kind of basing this season on, and just some general ideas about okay, when we think about preventing, you kind of tiptoed into this first one that Barb shared with us that we have to bring it up when it comes to these conversations around preventing yeah, that knowledge and life experience that we have. Like, okay, I know there's risk with you having your friends in the car when you're a new driver, or I know there's risk of my newly walking toddler falling down the stairs. And so but they don't see that risk necessarily. And so
Exactly.
we have to bring it up. We have to anticipate it because crossing the street might not look like a scary thing to my young kid. So we bring up those conversations and we need to be clear, like we said, the reason why, but just like a clear expectation of what you do to stay safe or healthy or all of those kinds of things.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
that kind of leads into the next tip, which is allowing them an opportunity to express their emotions around those whys, because when you have emotions around things, it often provides a glue to stick to your memory. Actually, that's a little
Mm.
sciencey on you, but
Yes.
we can
Sneaky
create
science.
yes, sneaky science. Emotions create glues, they create memory, they give us clues and reminders. And so, if we can help children express healthy ways to share their emotions, and we need to let them know that all emotions are acceptable and teach them healthy ways to cope. In general, with things that in life are, really stressing them out.
Totally. And that can help prevent some of those risky behaviors that might be unhealthy, right? Ways
Mhm.
we don't want them to cope. So that's kind of like the two for one there.
Exactly.
Um, and another really important one is kind of being that active and attentive parent. That when we're engaged with our kids, familiar with what's going on with them, it does give us a chance to notice when
Mhm.
things start to change. And so again, that's part of anticipating because we want to see it before it's a full-fledged problem. And so noticing some of those subtle changes does require us to be active and attentive so we can prevent
Prevent, anticipate, observe,
all of them.
absolutely. And then what we can do is recognize how important it is for us to set realistic limits. Realistic limits, not 1,000 limits with 65 steps each.
Mhm.
Realistic limits. I expect you, and then be clear about it. And we had a word last week. We talked about be consistent. Um,
Mhm.
if we select boundaries that are age appropriate for our children, make sure we're clear in communicating them, and then be consistent that when our children go beyond that limit, we have a consequence and they know what that consequence is. Um,
Mhm.
Nothing is harder for parents than to try to impose consequences 2/3 of the time, or
Yeah.
like on Wednesdays of the even days of the month. Those are the times we have consequences, right?
Yes. So that enforcing consistently, which is, I'll be honest, sometimes inconvenient as a
Mm,
parent. Sometimes my life
absolutely.
would be easier if I didn't, but I want my child to know what to expect.
Yes.
That if you make this choice, this is what happens. I
Yeah.
will do what I say. Yes, that they can trust those things and know, okay, if I make this choice, this is what will happen. That's actually a good thing for them.
I remember
Okay.
having a little practice session about that with
Yeah.
my toddler, young preschooler at the time, thinking, okay, we're really struggling in this area. And so, I knew I had some time, and this particular area involved when we would be outside of the house in public, and, the meltdowns would occur. And I thought, okay, we're going to practice me giving the consequence and being consistent, because
Mm.
I really don't have anything to get at the store today, but I'm going to take that toddler to the store. I know she's going to ask for something, and I'm going to be able to leave my cart and walk out the door because
Without needing anything.
I've anticipated that
Yes.
this is going to happen. And it's amazing how, if you have the opportunity to observe, anticipate, and then set that boundary and be consistent with the consequence. We had really very limited meltdowns in the store after I literally was consistent.
Mhm. Yes, if this happens, we will leave. And then we left when it happened.
Yes. And the
Yes.
number of parents in the background raising their fists like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 way to go." My chest is all puffed up,
Like,
child screaming, right? But
I'm
but
so consistent.
all the parents behind me cheering, yes.
Oh, well, in setting those expectations and kind of our rules and consequences and those kinds of things, kind of is our specific tip for this week.
Mhm.
So when we were talking about responding last week, so right, that was different than reacting. We talked about using stop, breathe, talk as
Mhm.
our specific technique. When it comes to preventing, I actually have like a little formula. Is that the
Okay.
same thing as a framework? I think
Not
it's
today.
different.
Today.
Not today.
Formula
Not
and
today.
framework, 2 different words.
Um, but so it's kind of these words and guidance that a phrasing that we can use to be clear about our expectation, our reason, and why,
Mhm.
right? So my example that I have is I expect blank.
Mhm.
Okay, so then you're gonna put like I expect this behavior or I
Okay.
expect this rule. I expect blank
Okay.
because,
Okay.
right? Insert your reason.
Mhm.
Uh, and then second sentence, simple. It's important to me that you are blank.
Okay.
So there's kind of like a value component there, right? Like it's important to me that
Yes.
you are safe, that you are healthy,
Yes.
that you're respectful,
Well,
that
thank
right?
you.
Well,
Thank
you were
you.
gonna say it. You were gonna say respectful if I didn't. um, and so yeah, so I expect blank behavior because blank reason.
Mhm.
It's important to me that you are blank.
Yes.
All right. So we're explaining that why. We're being very clear about exactly what we expect.
Mhm.
Right. And so this isn't, I expect you to be safe. It's more specific than that. I expect you to look both ways before you cross the road.
Mhm.
I expect you to pay attention to the road when you have friends in the car. Right?
Yes.
All of these things. I expect you to ask me if you would like to download a new app. So getting very specific about what it is that we expect and why.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I expect blank because blank. It's important to me that you are blank.
Yes.
Because almost all of the rules, especially when it comes to preventing, right? Spotting that risky behavior, that problem, that concern, it does come down to what we really want for our kids.
Mhm.
That value of being safe, being healthy, being respectful, whatever it
Yes.
is. And so explaining that to them clearly, that's kind of my specific tip for today on
I have
prevention.
one.
Yeah.
I expect you to let me know if you're going to be late tonight. This is my
Yeah.
teenager, right?
Yes.
I expect you to let me know if you're going to be late because if you're not home when you said you would be, I will worry about you. And it's important to me to know that you're safe.
Yay! It works.
That was spontaneous.
Yes, I was like on the spot. Yeah. And I think of the screen time. That's something new in our family. And so I expect you to ask me if you would like to, use whatever device. Because I need to know that you're using it so I can supervise you.
Mhm.
Because it's important to me that you're safe.
Yes,
Yes. Oh, we can do this.
we can. All right.
Yes, I would say. So we've talked through what preventing is, examples of the different kinds of things we prevent, resources, what it looks like across different ages, some tips for doing it. And then now we bring in our producer, Mackenzie DeYoung, who asks
You.
us an off the cuff question. We don't know what she's going to ask on our topic. Hey, Gens.
Hello.
Do our little stop, breathe, talk space here.
Yes.
Yes, it is time for Stop, Breathe, Talk. That moment when we stop, take a breath, and we talk about something. And today I'm going a little bit of a left turn from the conversation you've been having. As I was talking to our writer today about what question I could ask you, I think the recommendation she gave me hit a little too close to home.
Okay.
With something that really applies to me, honestly.
Mm,
Um, so the question is, we talk about risk, and
Mm.
yes, obviously, prevention is the whole point of this whole podcast, right?
mhm,
But some kids aren't the kids that will go out and run across the street and do this and do that. Some kids are like me that they're scared of everything and they're scared of doing something wrong, and the fear of doing something wrong is there. So how can we teach caution to our kids while also teaching them to not live in fear?
Mm.
So teach
Healthy risk.
them, yes.
Mhm.
How do we teach them that? How can you teach me that?
I think that the most important thing that you can do is go along beside them so that instead of pushing them out the door with a brand new friend that they don't know about, you obviously know about this friend, but you go with them. So I think about the times that you and I have interacted, and I'm taking you someplace new as a fellow coworker. Um, the way that I prevented anxiety or fear from bubbling up
Mhm.
was to be that buffer in between you and whatever it was that was news. And
Be
that's the same. Yeah,
insecure.
it was your security blanket, your binky, right? But we become that person, we become that buffer in that space so that we are challenging and encouraging them to try new and different things while at the same time acknowledging and recognizing that fear and fearfulness is really a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. And I think back to, of course, some of our season 3 conversations about temperament.
Mhm.
In particular, Rob Copeland, who reminded us about this concept of baby steps.
Mm.
And so I even think semi recently, my daughter and I were playing outside and in this public space, and there was this really nifty tree, and she was kind of interested in climbing it, but she basically just sat in the middle of the trunk, right at the ground. And I was like, okay, so what if we kind of like climbed up this branch? Like if you put your foot here and maybe you could hold on here, and that was where we started, right?
Mhm.
Like getting a little higher.
Yeah.
And then we walked around a little while. We came back to the tree. And by the end of the day, we were walking through. She was about as high as I could reach, to catch her, to be right below her. And so those little baby steps of kind of teaching and supporting what the next step is and helping them celebrate the success along the way. And literally when her foot would slip, I was right there.
Yes.
Right. I was there supporting and kind of coaching. And so I think of that process of baby steps and also reflecting on your own level of like concern, safety, healthy risk.
Mhm.
And that if you are a very, very cautious parent, and that's kind of your natural temperament, to kind of keep in check that like, okay, it's not risky for them to cross the street with me, right? It's not risky. Like finding those safe and healthy risks, and baby steps to teach them along the way, I think is a big part.
And baby steps as the adult, if you're the one that's cautious, because I can see this, like I've translated this to say my nephews who live on a farm and they'll go out and play. And I'm like, they know where they can go. They're okay. They can go to the chicken coop. They're all right. And I'm like, ooh. Yeah, baby steps for me, knowing maybe then I step outside and watch them do it. Just but yeah, it kind of also brought up that like analyzing the risk versus the reward
Yes.
of a situation. But yeah, I guess my question was, how can you teach people like me to risk and reward balance, and also teach people like me to help kids find that balance? So
we'll take you tree climbing.
Yes, we'll teach you tree climbing. I was gonna say, and I also think of the concept of finding the risk that does feel okay.
Yes.
If you're a more cautious parent, like, okay, I'm not ready for this yet. But my child could do this. Like they could try this other thing. So yeah. It looks different for everybody, but baby steps and thinking through Lori's too.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I needed that.
Awesome. Thanks, Kens. It's a great, like, we do need to think about, it's different for every parent and that level of concern, safety, where you live, and all of those things are factors in how we prevent and keep our kids safe and spot those problems and know how to handle them, right? That's the two parts of preventing.
Absolutely. So what's next?
Well, so we've made it through the R and the P, respond and prevent. And so then there's these 3 M's, and there's monitor, mentor, and model that are still coming. Next week is a monitor.
All right.
So very similar to prevent. Okay. But a little bit different. So you have to come here about what is this monitoring and how do we do that?
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today on the Science Parenting Podcast. And remember, subscribe to our weekly audio podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can watch the show on video each week on social media, and then join us again on social media, Facebook or Twitter at Science of Parents, to see us in your content feed.
Yes, please do come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is a research-based education program hosted by Lori Haynes and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This program is brought to you by Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.